There is a shift change at Riverside County Hospital every night at 11 p.m. And if you watched it, really watched it, the way someone watches something they are trying to understand rather than simply see, you would notice the same thing every time. The day nurses leave carrying a specific weight. It is not physical weight, though their feet and lower backs have opinions about the 12 hours they have just completed. It is the weight of accumulated care, of the dozens of small decisions and human interactions and moments of genuine connection that a good nurse absorbs over a full shift and carries out the door with them, because the work does not stay at the hospital. It follows them home. It sits at their dinner tables. It wakes them at 3 a.m. with a sudden memory of a patient's face. Before this story breaks your heart and rebuilds it again, please subscribe to this channel, ring that bell, and drop a comment below telling me which town or city you're listening from tonight. I read every single one. The night nurses arrive carrying something different, a kind of intentional stillness. The night shift selects for people who can sit with the dark, who find in the hospital's overnight quiet not emptiness but depth. The world contracted to the essentials: the patient, the monitor, the medication, the hand held in the dark. Nora Callahan, who was not using that name at the time, but who was always, underneath every other name, Nora Callahan, arrived at 11 p.m. every night, and was the stillest person in the building within minutes of clocking in. This stillness was not natural to her. It was constructed. Assembled piece by piece over 5 years of deliberate practice, the way a craftsperson assembles a piece of furniture, not for the furniture itself, but for the act of making, for the discipline of the making, for the proof that she could still make something. She had made herself ordinary. It had been, in its way, the hardest thing she had ever done, harder than the first deployment, harder than the third. Harder than the 11 days in a forward operating base in a country she still had not been told she had been in, when the original team was reduced to 4, and she had kept all 3 of the others alive on supplies and instinct, and the particular stubbornness of someone who does not lose people. Harder than all of that, because all of that had required to be exactly what she was. Ordinary required her to be something else. She was 39 years old. She had been a nurse, officially, on paper, in the records of Riverside County Hospital, for 4 years. Before that, there was a gap of about 8 months that the records did not account for precisely, which was not unusual for someone who said they had taken time off after a family illness. And before the gap, there was a life that existed in documents that very few people were cleared to read. She had been Sergeant First Class Nora Callahan, 18D, Special Forces Medical Sergeant. She had served 3 operational deployments across 11 years. She had received 2 decorations that she had been told she could not publicly acknowledge receiving. She had made 42 confirmed saves in active combat environments, 42 separate human beings who were alive, because of what she did and what she knew, and how she moved under fire. She had also, on a Tuesday evening in a forward operating base in an official non-location, discovered something that she should not have discovered. And the people who needed her to not have discovered it were very powerful and very motivated and very capable of managing the problem she represented. She had managed herself first. Before they could, 8 months of doing nothing, which was its own particular violence. Then the nursing certificate. She had her medical training already. The civilian qualification was almost administrative. Then the job application to Riverside County Hospital, which had liked her interview and hired her within a week and which had no idea. No way of having any idea what it had just added to its overnight staff. 4 years, she knew every patient on her floor by name. She knew their families, their fears, their specific 2 a.m. needs. She had learned to sit with dying people in a way that was different from her previous relationship with dying, quieter, more present, less about intervention and more about witness. She had discovered that she was good at this. That the part of her that had always been the most important part, the part that gave a genuine damn about whether people lived, translated across every context, battlefield or ward, combat scrubs or hospital scrubs, Same hands, same heart, different world. She arrived at 11 p.m. on a Thursday in November. She clocked in. She changed. She tied her hair back. She did not look in the mirror longer than necessary. She picked up the floor report from the outgoing charge nurse. 12 patients. 7 stable, 4 requiring close monitoring. 1 in room 13 who had been admitted that afternoon, a John Doe. They were calling him, which meant the paperwork was complicated or incomplete, admitted for what was documented as a severe neurological episode, comatose on arrival. No identification, no emergency contacts, brought in by ambulance from a location that the report listed vaguely as city center. She scanned the report with the professional briskness of someone reading the opening of a story they have read before. She stopped at room 13. She read the description again. Male, approximately 50 years old. Height and build listed in the admitting notes. Her eyes went to the physical description. The specific note about a scar, a surgical scar, old along the left side of the jaw. She put the report down. She picked it up again. She had not seen that scar in 4 years. She had assumed she would never see it again, because the man who carried it had been listed as killed in action 18 months before she had left the service, and she had attended his memorial, and she had believed it. She stood at the nurse's station for 11 seconds, very still, while several things she had understood about the last 4 years of her life began to reorganize themselves around a different center of gravity. Then she put the report in the folder, picked up her stethoscope, and went to do her rounds. She was very good at postponing things that needed to be postponed. She started at room 1, as she always did. Mrs. Eleanor Page, 78, recovering from a hip replacement with the magnificent stubbornness of someone who had decided the recovery would not take as long as anyone was predicting, and was daily producing evidence for this position. She was awake. She was always awake at this hour, and she greeted Nora by asking whether the overnight physician was the decent one or the one who spoke to patients like they were mildly inconvenient furniture. Dr. Osai tonight, Nora said, checking the IV. Good, said Mrs. Page. He has manners. He does, Nora agreed. She moved through the floor with the efficiency of long practice. Each room, each patient, each assessment conducted with the same complete attention she had given since her first shift here. The quality of her attention had never varied based on how tired she was or what she was carrying outside the ward. This was not professionalism, or not only professionalism, it was the deepest habit she had, the one that predated everything, the one that had survived every version of herself. When there was a person in front of her who needed care, they had all of her. Room 4, Danny Reyes, 44, post-surgical, 2 days out from a procedure that had gone well, and who was still not entirely convinced it had gone well despite the evidence. His anxiety was real and deserved to be met with real reassurance, not clinical dismissal. She sat with him for 6 minutes. She showed him the numbers. She told him what the numbers meant in language he could hold on to. He exhaled. You're the only person on this floor who talks to me like I'm not being dramatic. You're not being dramatic, she said. You're a person who had a significant surgery 2 days ago. It's reasonable to be uncertain. The day nurses keep saying I'll feel better soon. You will, Nora said. But soon is a word people use when they don't want to give you a timeline. Tuesday. By Tuesday you'll be asking when you can go home. He smiled, the particular smile of someone who has been given something they can hold on to. She continued her rounds. Room 9. The Vasquez family, not a patient, but a family in the waiting area adjacent to the floor, taking turns sitting with their father, who had been admitted 3 days ago. They knew her name. They saved her a cup of the coffee they brought from outside, because they had noticed, correctly, that the hospital coffee on this floor was an aggressive disappointment. She accepted the cup with genuine gratitude. Room 11, a teenager, 17, named Cam, who was here for reasons that were documented in the chart and who was also here, beneath the documented reasons, for reasons that were not documented but that Nora had identified in the first week, and had been quietly, carefully addressing in the specific way that required zero official paperwork, and maximum human presence. Cam was asleep. She checked the monitors. She adjusted the pillow, a small thing, 2 degrees of angle, the kind of thing that made the difference between sleeping through to morning and waking up at 4 a.m. with a stiff neck and a worse mood. She left a note on the table that said, "The numbers all look good tonight. Room 12, empty. Recent transfer, good news. Room 13." She stood in the doorway. The man in bed 13 was connected to 6 machines. Cardiac monitor, pulse oximeter, 2 IV lines, a blood pressure cuff cycling automatically, and a neurological monitor she had not seen on the admitting notes, and that she now looked at for a moment with the attention of someone who understands what it is and why its presence changes the picture. That monitor was not standard for a John Doe stroke admission. That monitor was specialized equipment that suggested someone very specific had either arranged or anticipated this admission. She walked to the bedside. The man was in his early 50s, dark hair going gray at the temples. The build of someone who had been physically exceptional for a long time and was still, even in the compromised state of a hospital bed, carrying it. The scar along the left jaw, surgical, old, 2 inches, that she had read about in the notes and was now looking at directly. She had last seen that scar 4 years and 3 months ago. On a man named Marcus Webb, who had been her team sergeant, who had been one of the best operators she had ever worked alongside, who had been killed in action on a Tuesday evening, and whose death had been confirmed and documented and mourned. The man in bed 13 had that scar. He also had the specific musculature pattern of someone with Marcus Webb's training history, the specific proportions of someone she had worked alongside for 6 years. The specific way the right hand rested, even in unconsciousness, slightly rotated outward, the old habit of a man who had once told her it was a reflex from years of keeping his weapon hand clear. She stood at the bedside for a long time. She did not reach for the chart. She already knew what the chart would say and what it would not say, and the gap between those two things was the interesting part. She checked his IV lines. She verified the monitors. She did everything that a conscientious nurse would do at the bedside of a new patient. She did not say his name. She was not ready to say his name, because saying it would make it real, and she needed another hour to decide what real meant in this context. She turned and walked back to the nurse's station. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the clock. It was 11:41 p.m. She estimated, a long night ahead. She had no idea yet how specifically correct that was. The van had been parked on Cordell Street since 9 p.m. This was 2.5 hours before the takeover was scheduled to begin, which was standard practice for the operations planning officer, a man named Carver who had learned, across 20 years of private military work, that the most expensive mistakes happened in the preparation window, not the execution window. You did not rush preparation. Preparation was where you found the things you hadn't anticipated, and finding them at 9 p.m. was vastly preferable to finding them at midnight. There were 8 of them in total. The van held 4. The other 4 were already inside. 2 had entered through the hospital's service entrance 4 hours earlier, posing as medical equipment technicians from a supplier the hospital actually used. The documentation had been exact. The equipment cases they carried had contained exactly what the documentation said they contained, because the cases would be checked, and the checking needed to produce nothing interesting. The other items had been inside the cases in compartments that the checking would not find, because the cases had been prepared by someone who knew exactly how checking worked. Carver sat in the van's front passenger seat and reviewed the floor plan for the 11th time. The target was in room 13 on the 3rd floor. The target was comatose, connected to monitoring equipment, completely unable to resist or flee. The job was simple: complete the neurological suppression that had been initiated by the compound administered during the target's admission, a compound that was designed to look, in any subsequent toxicology, like a natural progression of the stroke-like episode that had been staged to get him admitted. The target would die of his illness. The illness would be documented. The documentation would be complete. Simple. "What's on 3?" said the man in the seat behind him. His name was Hollis. He was the team's second in command, and he asked questions not because he didn't know the answers, but because he had learned that hearing an answer out loud was different from reading it on a screen. 12 patients. 1 RN on overnight. Night shift runs lean. Administrative decision. 1 on-call resident down the hall in the physician's lounge, which we seal first. Security is 1 guard on each floor, and they're managed by Werner and Cole from the moment we initiate. Cameras go dark at H-2 minutes. 1 nurse for 12 patients, Hollis said. 1 nurse, Carver confirmed. There was a pause. They run, Carver said. Every time. They are trained to protect patients and call for help, not to engage. She'll lock herself in a room and wait for rescue. We're in and out in less than 20 minutes. Hollis nodded. In the back of the van, the other 3 men ran their equipment checks in silence. Carver looked at the hospital building through the windshield. 3rd floor. 3rd window from the left. The light was on. Someone up there, going about their night. He had done this in hospitals before. The results had been what the results always were. Clean, fast, documented as natural causes. Hospitals were the easiest environments he worked in. He checked his watch. 40 minutes. He settled back in the seat. 12:14 a.m. Nora was at the nurse's station when the lights changed. Not a full blackout. Not the total darkness of a power failure, which would have triggered the full emergency generator sequence. This was a selective interruption. The overhead fluorescents on the 3rd floor going dark, while the emergency lighting, the blue-white strips along the floor and above the exit signs, remained. This was surgical. This was someone who knew exactly which circuits to cut and which to leave. In the 2 seconds of her mind processing this information, she had already noted, this is not an accident. She had already noted, the phone at the nurse's station had gone to a flat dead line when she'd lifted the receiver 30 seconds ago. She'd tried it as a habit check, half her attention on the chart she was writing, and had registered the absence of a dial tone and set it aside as a minor inconvenience. She was no longer setting it aside. Dead outgoing lines, selective lighting interruption. 2 in the morning, a John Doe in room 13 with specialized neurological monitoring equipment that had no good explanation. She stood up from the nurse's station. She did not make noise. She did not run. She walked with the deliberate calmness of someone who understands that the first 3 minutes of a crisis are the ones in which your behavior is most likely to be observed by people you haven't located yet, and that observed panic is a tactical liability. She walked to the medication room. She went inside. She closed the door. Inside the medication room in the dark, she stood very still and listened. The hospital had a specific sound architecture at 2 a.m. The ambient mechanical chorus of monitors and ventilation, and the distant elevator, the occasional footstep of the on-call resident, the particular quality of quiet that existed on a floor where 12 people were asleep, and 1 person was awake and responsible for all of them. She had learned this sound architecture the way a musician learns a piece, by absorption, by repetition, until the piece existed in her body, and any deviation from it was audible without effort. She heard the deviation, footsteps in the stairwell, more than 1 set. Moving with the deliberate precision of people trying to be quiet and almost succeeding. She counted. 2 sets, maybe 3, coming up. She ran her inventory. Physical. She was fit, she was rested, she had slept 8 hours before this shift. Her left knee had the old cartilage complaint that showed up in cold weather, and tonight it was cold. She would work around it. Environment. She knew this floor completely. Every room, every closet, every access point. She had mapped it, without consciously deciding to map it, in the first 2 weeks of working here, the habit of someone for whom spatial awareness was survival rather than preference. She knew where the ceiling access points were. She knew which rooms had secondary exits. She knew the load-bearing capacity of the supply shelving units, and the specific acoustic properties of the utility corridor behind the ward. People to protect. 12 patients. 3 who could not be moved under any circumstances. They were too fragile, too connected to equipment. 4 who could be moved to defensible positions, if she could reach them before the team on the stairs reached the floor. 5 who were mobile and could be directed to positions of safety with clear instruction. She had no weapon. She had her training and the contents of a medical floor at 2 a.m., which included more improvised capability than most people would think and which she had catalogued, again without consciously deciding to, in the same ongoing ambient inventory that covered the floor plan and the access. She had a specific item in her locker that she was going to need. The stairwell door opened. She gave herself 3 seconds to complete the assessment. Then she began to move. Before the next sequence of events, which unfolds quickly, and which the people who experienced it from the inside later described as both endless and instantaneous, which is what combat always feels like to anyone honest about it. You need to understand one thing about Nora Callahan. The 5 years she had spent being ordinary had not made her ordinary. She had thought they might. She had, in the first year of the nursing job, in the careful quiet of the life she was building, genuinely hoped that the distance between who she was and who she was trying to be would close gradually, and that eventually the two things would meet in the middle, and she would simply be a nurse, a real nurse, someone for whom the question of what she had been before was historical rather than present. The distance had not closed. What had happened instead was something she had not read about and nobody had prepared her for. The two selves had learned to coexist. The nurse was real. The operative was real. They occupied the same body, the same mind, the same set of hands, and they had arrived at a kind of productive truce, in which the nurse was the primary identity and the operative was the emergency protocol. The emergency protocol had not been activated in 5 years. It activated now with the efficiency of a system that had been maintained even in dormancy, updated, serviced, run in low-level background processes she hadn't always been conscious of, the inventory taking, the spatial mapping, the automatic assessment of every person who entered a room she was in, every vehicle that moved too slowly, every question with a second question embedded inside it. The nurse had been watching over her patients. The operative had been watching over the nurse. She moved through the medication room's connecting door into the clean utility room, through the utility room into the main corridor's blind spot, a 6-foot stretch of wall between the storage alcove and the linen closet that the overhead cameras would have covered and the floor-mounted emergency lighting did not. She moved through it in under 4 seconds. The stairwell team had not yet cleared the landing. She could hear them, still 1 floor below, moving carefully, which told her they were professional, and which told her they were not accustomed to professional resistance, because professionals who expected professional resistance moved faster, not slower. Slowness was the movement pattern of people who expected to find nurses hiding in supply closets. She went to her locker. The item at the back, under the folded jacket, she had put it there on her 3rd day at this job, and she had left it there for 4 years with the specific logic of someone who hoped never to need it, and who was constitutionally incapable of not having it. It was small. It was not a firearm. Carrying a firearm into a hospital was a complication she had weighed and rejected, because the risk of its discovery was higher than the tactical benefit in an environment where her first line of protection was her invisibility. It was a fixed-blade knife. Military issue. 4-inch blade. She had carried the same model for 11 years before it, and she knew exactly what it could and could not do. She pocketed it. She took the communication device from the hidden sleeve in the same jacket, a personal radio encrypted, short range, that she had also never used in 4 years, and that now she turned to the frequency she needed on muscle memory alone. Static. Then, faintly, the sounds of the building. Someone talking, distant, on a frequency the team was using. She listened for 4 seconds. She had enough. There were 6 of them, by the sound of the communication patterns. 2 already on the floor, the ones who had come in earlier as technicians, which meant they were already deployed in positions she did not yet know. 4 coming up the stairs. The target was room 13. She had approximately 90 seconds before the stairwell team reached the floor. She went to work. 2:10 a.m. The first thing she did was not tactical. It was nursing. She went to room 4. She woke Danny Reyes with a hand on his shoulder, a specific touch, firm and calm, that communicated wake up without communicating emergency. Danny, she said, very quietly. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it without asking questions. Can you do that? He was awake in an instant, the particular alertness of someone who had been sleeping lightly through anxiety. What bathroom? She said. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me. 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock. That's the signal. Understand? What's happened? Building issue, she said. Precautionary. You're not in any danger as long as you're in that bathroom. He went. She heard the lock click. She repeated this with 4 more patients, the ones she had assessed as mobile and manageable, and who could be moved quickly without clinical consequence. Each one she gave a specific signal and a specific instruction, and each one she looked directly in the eye and told the truth in the only version of truth that was useful in those seconds. You are safe. This is precautionary. Do exactly this. The patients who could not be moved, she left in their rooms. For them, she did something different. She went into each room, and she adjusted their monitoring equipment to run on the battery backup that existed for exactly this kind of power interruption. She silenced the external alarms, the ones that would broadcast on the nurse's station board, the ones that the people now on this floor would hear, while keeping the local indicators functional. She was the only alarm system these patients had. She was going to have to be sufficient. She was at room 11 when she heard the stairwell door open. The team was on the floor. She was in the doorway of room 11. Cam was asleep. She pulled the door closed silently and stepped into the alcove beside it and did not move. 2 figures in the emergency lighting. Dark tactical gear. Moving in the pattern of a standard 2-person sweep. 1 covering forward, 1 watching back. Professional. Unhurried. Confident they had not seen her yet. She watched them move toward the nurse's station, which was empty, which what they would expect and what they had planned for. The absent nurse, the empty station, the clear path to room 13. She gave them 12 seconds, then she moved. She had once been assessed, officially, in a psychological evaluation that was part of her operational qualification, as possessing what the evaluator had called extraordinary tactical restraint. The evaluator had meant it as a clinical description of her ability to delay action until the optimal moment, to resist the physiological pressure of a crisis that pushed most people to move before they should. She had thought about that phrase over the years. Tactical restraint. It sounded like a limitation. It was, she had come to understand, the most powerful thing she had. The ability to wait when everything in the environment was screaming. Act was not the absence of response. It was the management of response. It was understanding that the difference between acting at the right moment and acting at the almost right moment was the difference between success and a very bad outcome for everyone involved. She waited until the 2 figures from the stairwell were committed to the route toward the nurse's station, their backs to the alcove, their attention forward, before she moved. The first engagement lasted 9 seconds. This is not a long time by most measurements. It is a very long time when the measurement unit is the number of decisions that must be made per second and the margin for error in each is 0. She had no margin. She operated without it. When it was over, both men were in the linen closet. Both were alive. She had been specific about this, because leaving bodies on the floor of her ward was not something she was willing to do. Both were secured with the restraint materials she had taken from the utility room, not the combat zip ties of her previous life, but the Velcro patient restraint straps from the supply shelf, which were, it turned out, perfectly adequate for the purpose. She took their radios, their weapons. She assessed the weapons with the rapid professional attention of someone who had spent years working with them and chose one, a compact pistol, familiar enough, and placed the other in the alcove behind the linen closet, where it would not be found quickly. She listened to the radio traffic. The team leader, Carver, she now knew from the radio, was on the floor. With him, 3 more. 2 had already been positioned at the stairwells. 1 was at the elevator. That left Carver and 1 other moving toward the wing. Toward room 13. She had 4 minutes by her estimate. Possibly less, she went. 2:30 a.m. The corridor outside room 13 was not how she had left it. The 2 men who had entered as technicians, the ones who had been on the floor for hours, the ones she hadn't known about until she'd intercepted the radio traffic, were positioned at the room's door. 1 on each side, weapons at low ready, watching the approach corridor in both directions. She was in the utility access above the corridor. She had gone up through the access panel in room 11's bathroom, a panel she had identified in her second week of working on this floor, and which, 4 years later, she had just discovered the specific use case for. The crawl space above the 3rd floor was 60 centimeters of clearance and 2 decades of hospital infrastructure, and she had moved through it in the dark by memory of the floor plan below, which she could map as accurately as if she were walking it. She was above the corridor outside room 13. She could see, through the ventilation gap, the 2 figures below. She could also hear, through the walls of room 13, something she had not expected. Movement. Not the movement of machines. She knew the sound of the monitors, the ventilator rhythm, the IV pump cycles. This was a different movement. The particular small sounds of a person trying to move with the absolute minimum possible expression. The man in bed 13 was not comatose. She sat with this information in the crawl space above the corridor for 3 seconds. Marcus Webb, and she was calling him that now, in her head, because the alternative was too large to manage while there were 2 armed men 8 feet below her. Marcus Webb was not comatose. He had been admitted as comatose. The neurological monitor beside his bed was not monitoring a comatose patient. It was providing cover for a patient who was faking coma, which required monitoring to maintain the physiological story, which meant he had staged the admission, which meant he had planned to be here, in this hospital, on this floor. She was the only person he knew on this floor. She ran the implication forward at speed and arrived at a conclusion that was large enough to deal with later and small enough to set aside for now. Later. She would process it later. She positioned herself above the access panel, directly over the near side of the corridor. She had one advantage over the 2 figures below. They were watching the corridor. They were not watching the ceiling. In 5 years of private military operations, she estimated, they had never needed to watch the ceiling. She opened the panel. She dropped. What followed was 11 seconds of work that she did not narrate to herself while it was happening, because narration required a fraction of processing that she needed for other things: the corridor, the 2 men, the specific geometry of the space, the weapons they were carrying and the angles at which they were carrying them. The outcome she needed: both men down, nobody dead, nobody alerted via radio before she could prevent the alert. 11 seconds. She stood in the corridor. Both men were down. The radio was in her hand. She had compressed the transmit button at the critical moment, which had prevented the involuntary keying that a startled person's hand produced when it hit the device. She opened the door to room 13. She went inside. She closed the door behind her. She looked at the bed. Marcus Webb looked back at her. His eyes were open. He was not comatose. He looked, if she was being honest, exactly like what he was. A man who had been maintaining a physiological performance for 18 hours and who was very glad it was over, complicated enormously by the fact that the person who had just come through the door was the specific person he had most needed and most complicated feelings about seeing. Nora stood in the doorway of room 13 and looked at the man she had mourned for 4 years and who was self-evidently not dead. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. "We have approximately 3 minutes before Carver reaches this floor," she said. "So I'm going to need you to get out of that bed." He was already moving. There was not time, in those 3 minutes, for the conversation they needed to have. There was not time for the 4 years of questions she had been unknowingly accumulating, or the specific fury she was aware of building in the back of her mind, like a weather system that had not yet made landfall, or the other thing, the thing that was not fury, and that she was absolutely not looking at right now. Marcus Webb got out of the bed. He moved with the particular care of someone who had been horizontal for 18 hours and whose body was offering a detailed inventory of its objections. He was dressed in a hospital gown, which was inconvenient. She went to the closet. Every hospital room had one, and found, which surprised her, civilian clothes. Dark trousers, a gray shirt, boots, folded neatly, left by someone in advance. He had planned this. He had planned this comprehensively. "Can you move?" she said. "Yes." "At operational capacity?" A pause. 80%. "Good enough," she said. "Carver has 4 more on the floor. 2 at the stairwells, 1 at the elevator, 1 Carver." He looked at her quickly. Radio intercept. Why? Something crossed his face. Something she recognized. The specific expression of a person who has just had a piece of information they were carrying rearranged by a piece of information they didn't have. "Carver works for Halbrook," he said. She absorbed this. Halbrook was the name she had spent 4 years not saying. The name at the center of the thing she had discovered in the forward operating base on a Tuesday evening. The name that had been attached to the decision to resolve the problem she represented. "I know," she said. I know who he works for, Marcus. We need to move." She handed him the weapon she had taken from the corridor. He took it with the automaticity of someone for whom receiving a weapon in a crisis was a reflex, not a decision. "There's a utility corridor behind the east wall. Access through room 14's bathroom. Takes us to the service stairwell, which they haven't covered. It's not on the floor plan they would have used because it was added in a renovation 3 years ago." He looked at her. "You know the renovation timeline of your hospital's stairwells," he said. "I know everything about this floor," she said. "Let's go." 12:38 a.m. The utility corridor was exactly what it sounded like. Narrow, industrial, lit by a single emergency strip, smelling of the specific combination of cleaning chemicals and pipe insulation that existed behind every hospital wall. It was not a comfortable space. It was, however, a space that nobody on Carver's team knew existed, which made it the most valuable real estate on the 3rd floor. They moved through it in single file. Nora first. It was her floor, her map, her lead. Marcus behind her, and she could hear from his movement pattern that the 80% assessment had been honest. He was close to full capacity. That was useful. She stopped at the junction that connected to the service stairwell. "One at the elevator," she said, very quiet. "The stairwell guards are covering the main stairs. This one they don't know about. But Carver will go to room 13 when his team doesn't report," Marcus said. "He's already on the floor. He'll have heard the silence on the radio." "How long since last communication from his team?" She checked. 6 minutes. "He'll be moving now," Marcus said. She thought. She was building the floor in her head. The positions she knew, the positions she had to infer, the geometry of the problem. Carver was moving toward 13. He would reach the corridor outside 13 in approximately 2 minutes. He would find 2 of his men down and the room empty. The options available to him at that point were limited, and she knew what a professional like Carver would do. He would assume the target had been moved by someone with knowledge of the building, and he would begin a systematic search starting from the most logical exit routes. The main stairwells. The elevator. The routes a nurse would know. He would not immediately know about the utility corridor. That was her window. "I need 2 minutes," she said. "For what?" "My patients." He looked at her. "Nora, there are 12 people on this floor," she said. Her voice was very level. 5 of them I've moved to protected positions. 3 I couldn't move. 4 more who are mobile but who don't know what's happening. I need 2 minutes to confirm the immobile patients are stable and to put the remaining mobile patients somewhere Carver's sweep won't find them." He held her gaze for a beat. 2 minutes, he said. "I'll cover the stairwell access." She moved through her floor with the efficiency of someone who had run this exact protocol in her head 1,000 times, not its exact crisis, but the drill of it, the logic of it, the question she had asked herself in quiet moments over 4 years. If something happened, what would the sequence be? Mrs. Eleanor Page in room 1, awake as she almost always was. She looked at Nora with the directness of a woman who had lived 78 years and had developed an accurate instinct for when a situation was worse than it was being presented. "What's happening?" she said. Not "is something wrong?" Not "I heard something." Just, "what's happening?" The directness of someone who wanted the truth and could handle it. "Building security situation," Nora said. "Being managed. I need you to stay in this bed and not go to the door for any reason. No matter what you hear. Are the other patients? I'm checking everyone. You're stable. Stay here." Mrs. Page looked at her. "Are you going to be okay?" Nora held her gaze for 1 second. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "Stay in the bed." She moved to the 3 patients who could not be moved. The ones on ventilators, on continuous monitoring, on equipment that would kill them to disconnect. She went to each bedside. She confirmed equipment status. She made the adjustments that kept the external alarm signals dark while keeping the patients monitored. She spoke to each of them. 2 were unconscious. 1 was awake with the wide-eyed fear of someone who could hear that something was wrong and could not ask questions. "I'm here," she said to the one who was awake. An older man, 63, 3 days out from a cardiac event. "I'm not leaving this floor. You're going to be fine. Close your eyes." He closed his eyes. He was shaking. She moved to the last of the mobile patients, 2 she hadn't reached in the initial sweep. She directed them to the bathroom in room 3, which was the largest bathroom on the floor and the most interior, farthest from the external walls and the stairwells. She gave them the knock signal. She told them what she had told the others. "Building situation precautionary, do not open this door." 1 minute 50 seconds. She went back to Marcus. "Done?" he said. "Done," she said. "Carver's at 13, he said. "I could hear the radio. His team didn't respond and he's doing a sweep." "Then we go now," she said. "Service stairwell, down to 2 through the east corridor to the administrative wing. From there we can." The stairwell door opened, not the service stairwell, the main stairwell. And Carver came through it. He was not what she had expected from the radio voice, which had been controlled and efficient and suggested someone who had reached a place beyond the need for theatrics. He was shorter than the voice implied, compact, with the build of someone who had trained specifically for efficiency rather than intimidation. Around 50. Gray at the temples. Eyes that moved constantly, cataloging, never settling. He saw them in the same moment they saw him. And his response was, she noted this with a professional's appreciation, very fast. He did not freeze. He did not go for his weapon immediately, which was correct, because going for the weapon first gave the other person the same fraction of a second, and at this distance fractions mattered. He moved sideways, buying himself angle, and his weapon came up in the same motion. "Don't," said Nora. She had her weapon up first, by approximately half a second. At a distance of 4 meters, this was the entire conversation. He evaluated the situation with the speed of someone who had been in situations like this and knew exactly what the numbers meant. "The nurse," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at Marcus. Something shifted in his expression, surprise quickly managed. "Webb," he said. "Carver," Marcus said. "You're not in a coma." "Observant," Marcus said. Carver's eyes went back to Nora. He was reading her, running the same assessment she was running on him, trying to establish what he was dealing with. She watched him work through it. She watched the moment he arrived at conclusion, which was the moment his expression settled from active calculation into a different register. "Special forces," he said. "Not a question. Night shift," she said. "Your people are alive," she continued. "Every one of them. I want you to know that because it matters and because it means this doesn't have to get worse than it already is." A pause. "You took down 6 of my people," he said. "Yes. Alone. The floor was quiet," she said. "I had time." Another pause. She watched him recalibrate, not toward violence, she assessed, but toward the specific calculation of a professional deciding whether the situation was recoverable. "Halbrook sent me," he said. "You understand what that means?" "I understand exactly what it means," she said. "I've understood for 4 years. Then you know I'm not the last person he'll send." "No," she said. But you're the one in front of me right now. She held his gaze. He held hers. Put it down, Carver, she said. Your operation is finished. Your team is secured. In approximately 7 minutes, the silent alarm that I triggered when your technicians cut the main lines is going to bring federal response to this building, not local, federal. Because the administrator of this hospital had a very specific protocol installed 2 years ago by someone who knew this building might one day need that level of response. She paused. 7 minutes. She did not know with complete certainty that the federal protocol would produce a federal response in 7 minutes. She knew the protocol existed. She did not know its exact timeline. But Carver did not know what she didn't know. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Marcus. This was your play, he said. All of it. Put the weapon down, Carver, Marcus said. Carver put the weapon down. He put his hands up. He sat down against the wall, which is what you did when the situation had resolved, and your role in what came next was to wait. Nora kept her weapon up for another 15 seconds. Then she lowered it. She looked at Marcus. 7 minutes, he said. More or less, she said. Did you actually trigger the federal protocol? I triggered something, she said. I pressed several things. One of them was probably correct. He looked at her for a moment. Then, despite everything, despite the stairwell and the weapons and the 4 years of absence and the conversation they had not yet had, the ghost of something moved across his face. That was, she thought, that she allowed herself to think, something like the beginning of a smile. The federal response came in 11 minutes, not 7. Close enough. In those 11 minutes, Nora went back to her patients. She went to every room. Every person she had moved, she checked. Every person who had stayed, she sat with for a moment. She went to room 3 and knocked twice, paused, knocked once, and let the people out of the bathroom and told them it was over with the particular calm of someone who needed them to believe it. Mrs. Eleanor Page, when Nora appeared in her doorway, looked at her for a long moment. You look different, she said. Long night, Nora said. You look, Mrs. Page considered, like yourself, more yourself than I've seen you. Nora didn't answer that. She checked the IV. She adjusted the bedside light. She said good night. She went back to room 13. Marcus was sitting on the edge of the bed. The hospital gown was gone. He was dressed in the clothes from the closet. He looked like what he was, a man who had been running something for a very long time and who was, for the first time in that time, in a room where the running could pause. She closed the door. She sat in the chair beside the bed, the visitor's chair, the one the families used, the one she had sat in with patients' families 100 times. She looked at him. Start from the beginning, she said. He told her. It took 22 minutes. The federal agents were in the building before he finished, and she put a hand up at the door when the first agent appeared to say, 5 minutes. And the agent, reading something in her face that made the request reasonable, waited. He told her. He had found the same thing she had found earlier. He had been in a position to go further into it. His role, his access, his specific relationships. He had spent 2 years building the case. And he had concluded, at the end of those 2 years, that the case would be destroyed before it could be used unless the person who was going to be used to discredit it, herself, was no longer findable. He had faked his death to go off-grid and build the case. He had arranged her discharge in the specific way that made her invisible, not just to the people looking for her, but to the system itself. He had, without her knowledge, been the reason the first attempt on her life had failed. A piece of information redirected, a location misdirected, an intercepted order. He had been, for 4 years, working the case and watching over her at the same time. He had come to this hospital because the case was ready, because the hearing was scheduled, because he needed to be somewhere he could testify from, somewhere the people who wanted to stop him couldn't reach him, and she was the only person he trusted completely enough to be in the building. He had not told her. He had not told her because telling her meant finding her, and finding her meant risking the trail that had kept her safe. Nora sat with all of this for a long moment after he finished. You let me think you were dead, she said. Yes, for 4 years, yes. I went to your memorial. I know. I'm sorry. The room was very quiet. You were protecting me, she said. Yes, without asking me whether I wanted to be protected. He said nothing. He knew better than to argue with the accuracy of this. I want to be angry about that, she said. You're entitled to be. I am angry about that, she clarified. I'm also, she stopped. The other thing. The thing she had been not looking at all night. I'm also something else. He looked at her. We're going to talk about this, she said. Properly. When this is done and the federal agents have what they need and the patients on my floor are settled, and the sun has come up and I've had approximately 8 hours of sleep, we're going to sit down and have the whole conversation. Okay. All of it, she said. All of it, he agreed. She stood up. She smoothed her scrubs. She went to the door and opened it and told the federal agent they could come in. She went back to work. The sun came up at 6:47 a.m. Nora was on the roof. She had been given the option, repeatedly, by federal agents who were not accustomed to being told to wait and who were being repeatedly told to wait, of ending her shift and going somewhere quieter to give her statement. She had repeatedly declined. Her shift ran until 7. There were 12 patients on the 3rd floor. 3 of them had been through a significant, frightening event and needed to see a familiar face before the day team arrived. She had done her work. She had given 30 minutes to the federal agents in the break room at 5 a.m., a conversation that was preliminary by everyone's understanding, and that would be followed by many longer conversations in the days and weeks ahead. She had answered what she answered and said what she would discuss later, and said it with the pleasantness of someone who was not being obstructive, but who was also not going to be rushed. She had gone back to the floor. She had done her final rounds of the shift with the same attention she always gave them. She had visited every patient. Mrs. Eleanor Page she visited last, and Mrs. Page had been awake and had asked, with the directness she always brought to conversation, "Was it you? Whatever was happening last night, was it you who sorted it?" Nora had been quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. Because Mrs. Page deserved the truth, and because the cover story was not going to survive a 78-year-old woman who had been awake all night and had heard things. Mrs. Page had nodded slowly. "I knew there was something about you," she said. "From the first week. You move wrong for a nurse." Nora smiled, a genuine one. "I move right for a nurse," she said. "Just also right for some other things. Are you going to be here tomorrow night?" Nora thought about this question and all the things it contained. "I don't know," she said honestly. "A lot is going to change in the next few days, but someone good will be here. I'll make sure of that before I go." Mrs. Page had nodded. She had reached out and squeezed Nora's hand once. "Good," she said. "You can go now." On the roof in the early morning, Nora held the unit patch in her closed fist. She thought about the floor below her, about the 12 people she had spent the night protecting, about the fact that she had done that when the crisis came, the first thing she had done was not run, not hide, not call for help she knew wasn't coming. She had moved her patients to safety, and then she had gone to work. The work she had not done in 5 years and which had, it turned out, been waiting for her with perfect patience. She thought about Marcus, who was somewhere in this building in the company of federal agents, giving the testimony that he had spent 4 years constructing. The case that was going to do, finally, what she had wanted done the night she had walked into the wrong office and said the wrong thing to the wrong person and set 4 years of consequences in motion. She thought about what came next. She was not, she had decided somewhere in the last 9 hours, going to disappear again. She was done with disappearing. She had been very good at it, and it had cost her things she had not fully counted when she began, and she was not willing to pay for it anymore. She was also, she had decided, not going back to the life before. She was going to do what she had always done, which was find the thing she was genuinely needed for and do it at the highest level she was capable of. And the thing she was genuinely needed for, in this chapter, in this version of herself, in the strange specific life she had assembled from the wreckage of the previous one, was this. The floor, the patience, the 2 a.m. darkness. She was going to keep doing this. She was going to do it as herself, which was a thing she had not been able to say for a long time. She opened her fist and looked at the unit patch. She thought about all the things it represented, the good things and the terrible things, and the specific impossible beauty of doing hard work alongside people you trusted, which was the thing she had missed most, which was the thing that the ward had quietly given her back, in a different form over 4 years, without her quite noticing. She put the patch in her pocket. She was going to keep that too. The door to the roof opened behind her. She didn't turn around. Footsteps. Particular footsteps. Your shift ended 11 minutes ago, Marcus said. I know, she said. He came to stand beside her at the railing. The city below them was waking up, the first traffic, the first light in restaurant windows, the particular quality of early morning that was neither night nor day, but the hinge between them. The agents are done with me for now, he said, for the next few hours at least. A pause. You said we'd talk, he said. I said we'd talk after I slept, she said. Right, 8 hours, she said. I meant 8 hours, I know. Another pause. The city below, the sun coming up. Nora. What? I'm glad you were on this floor, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I'm glad too, she said. Now stop talking. I'm watching the sunrise. He stopped talking. They watched the sunrise. And the city went on below them, ordinary and indifferent and full of people who would never know what had happened in one building during one very long night, full of people who were alive in the usual way, without knowing that the usual way had been defended, again by someone in blue scrubs who had simply refused to let the darkness have the floor. If you love this type of intense nurse-taking action tales, hit that like button, share the video with your fellow thrill seekers, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a new story.